Well, that's an interesting question. Anyone that felt safe going to depths in the Titan was deluded or delusional. I mean, it was an experimental vessel. It was clear that it was dangerous, and anyone that wanted to go was it was either delusional if they thought it wasn't dangerous, or they were just embracing the sense of risk. I mean, it's kind of like jumping out of an airplane. I mean, you don't do it because it's safe. You do it because it's an adrenaline rush. And yeah, I would have gone back down again. I mean, that we weren't going down in search of safety. We were going down in search of adventure and exploration.
What was your overall impression of the safety culture at OceanGate?
The way I would describe, well, Stockton Rush was a very interesting individual, and he was a brilliant man. He was an inventor, was an aeronautical engineer, had flown experimental airplanes, had built an experimental submersible. So this was a man who was engaged in high-risk endeavors and was comfortable with a level of risk that most people would not tolerate. At the same time, Stockton made a very conscious and astute effort to maintain a perceptible culture of safety around a high-risk environment. And by that, I mean that there was a very detailed set of steps taken to abort a dive. For instance, we had what we called anomalies, which were seemingly minor events that had no real significant bearing, but if just some little issue that popped up. If there were a certain number of anomalies, it constituted a strike, or if there was a major, something that you would consider more major impact, that could constitute a strike on its own. If you got the 3 strikes, they aborted the dive. Anyone on the ship, including the cook, had the ability to say that we're aborting the dive for whatever reason they thought. So I'm not sure how to better illuminate that reality for you, but other than to say that it was a high-risk endeavor in which a dedicated attempt was made to adhere to a culture of safety.
You used the term perception of safety. So it was your opinion that
it wasn't a safe. This was not. It was not safe diving in the Titan, and it was never supposed to be safe. And if it was safe, then I'm not. I mean, you might as well just get in a trolley car and ride around town. But it wasn't supposed to be safe.
Thank you. That concludes my questions.
Okay.
Sir, Lieutenant Commander Emmons now has questions for you.
Good morning, Mr. Hagan.
Good morning.
How did the payments work for your dives as a mission specialist? Like, did you write a check? Did you wire? Who did you write the check out to? How did that work?
Well, I certainly didn't write a check. I believe, I don't remember who we sent the money to, but I received an email giving me directions on where to wire the funds. I forwarded the email to one of my secretaries, and she wired the funds. I don't remember. I don't even remember exactly how much it was, but it was wired to, and I don't remember who we wired it to. I assume it was the OceanGate, but I honestly don't know. I wasn't. I mean, that was just an incidental thing to me. I wasn't paying that much attention.
Were you aware of a refund policy at OceanGate? You briefly mentioned it, but from what you were told the refund policy was?
I'm not aware of a refund policy.
Were you ever required to get a physical or a medical exam before your dives with OceanGate?
I was asked to get a physical.
And did you conduct the physical?
Yes.
And did you have to show them proof of that physical?
I mean, my memory's not exactly clear. I believe that I emailed them a physical report, but again, I'm a little foggy. I'm getting old. You'll have to excuse me.
You had stated earlier that you conducted some training with OceanGate members.
Yes.
Lieutenant Steele, can you pull up Coast Guard Exhibit 101, which this is the 2023 Mission Specialist Crew Agreement, but I just want to see if you were provided with a similar document. And please go to page 5. Were you ever provided a similar document? We can scroll to the top so you can read the title if it looks familiar, but it's basically a crew agreement that they sent to the mission specialists.
I'm sure it looks familiar, but I probably just gave it a cursory review.
And you're on page 5. Okay. Under there on this second paragraph, I believe, there we go. Thank you. It states, I understand that as a member of the expedition crew, I will need to complete substantial training prior to the start of the expedition, up to 14 hours depending on prior maritime experience. Did you receive or conduct similar amount of time training?
Mr. Neubauer, is this a document that we've established Mr. Hagan would have seen? I believe this is 2023 Expedition Mission Agreement.
Yes, ma'am, it is. I asked if he saw a similar agreement.
Okay, but
Right,
just
and
to-
he
but-
said he doesn't recall, and he
Okay.
hasn't read it. So maybe we can ask if he recalls this.
Yes, and I think to frame it, sort of this is a later document for 2023. If you want to take a moment to review it and then say if it looks familiar.
I just read it.
Okay.
Yeah, I recall that we were to receive training. Now, in terms of, you mean training, well, it says prior to the start of the expedition. So we received training on site, obviously, but prior to the start of the expedition, we held a series of kind of like webinars or Zoom calls. And in 2021, we were still under COVID protocols, especially in Canada. So these were all done remotely. And, and I don't recall how long they were, maybe 90 minutes each. And I believe they were actually recorded. So there was a series of those type of things. They sent us a bunch of documentation that we did, I did read through. I didn't dwell on it extensively. It wasn't, it wasn't like that all that illuminating. It was just a bunch of boilerplate and common sense type of directives. But I did skim through it. So there was a level of training. I have no idea whether it constituted 14 hours.
Thank you.
So, sir, just to clarify too, are you saying that training agreement you just read is similar to the one you had seen previously, but you can't match it exactly? So,
It looks familiar. Yeah.
okay. Thank you, sir.
Did you attend any testing of the Titan in the Bahamas?
I did not.
You stated also earlier that you were aware the Titan was an experimental submersible, but were you aware that the Titan wasn't classed or tested or registered? Was that ever brought up to you?
I was well aware of that. And there were no protocols in place, as I understand it, to test a cylindrical carbon fiber fuselage for deep ocean diving. So I don't believe there was any facility to actually test it at that level. So Stockton, and again, this is my understanding, Stockton would have had to create the whole testing protocol in order to test his own ship.
Did he ever go over the testing protocol that he conducted with you?
Only conversationally. And I don't recall the exact conversation, but I mean, I'm certainly was aware of their previous dives, and I discussed it with PH and Stockton at length, and no one tried to deceive me that this was a safe or easy operation, but I was comfortable going down with them.
I'm going to kind of move to the Titanic Expedition 2021. Again, I know we briefly talked about that with Lieutenant Commander Williams. As discussed, you were on that test dive to the Titanic wreck site for dive 62 on July 3rd, 2021. The dive that only descended to 1,700 meters. When did you pay to be a part of that dive? What year?
I believe it was within 6 months of the launch date, so it was, I approached, it was in the first quarter of 2021, because I approached Dave around Christmas, New Year's, and told him I wanted to go, and he connected me with OceanGate, so it would have been in the first quarter of 2021.
And what was the purpose, again, of that dive? It's listed as a systems test. What were they testing, to your awareness?
They were testing to make sure the Titan could go to depth.
Lieutenant Steele, can you pull up Coast Guard Exhibit 052, which is the dive log and maintenance log, and go to page 2? This is kind of hard to read, but we'll try to zoom in to dive 62. And on the right, as Lieutenant Commander Williams stated, it states that there was a loss of the starboard thrusters. Can you scroll down to page 14? This is, page 14, this is part of the maintenance log section. And if you look under dive 62 on July 3rd, 2021, there are several issues listed, and some are dive critical. And that was the dive you were on, correct? Dive 62 on the 3rd of July.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to read them for the record. It states, incident, external hull HPA valve set in the wrong position for the dive. Starboard control pod failed at 1,700 meters after pop sound heard, 0 vacuum, 0 temp, green water alarm. 2 drop weights jammed in the starboard channel. Number 1 and number 3 acoustic sensors have extreme and unusual events, thousands of hits with 5,000 to 6,000 levels only. All other sensors appear normal. Dome hinge retention plate bent, DVL intermittent, external lights flickering and drawing 14 amps, pan and tilt not functional, port battery will not turn on, rear axis camera mount broken, and sub comes off the platform in a rough launch. Were you aware of all these incidents during your dive or after your dive?
Well, I had forgotten that they had an acoustic event down below, but yeah, that does ring a bell now that I'm looking at it.
So I'll ask you to go into that acoustic event, but I'm going to ask Lieutenant Steele to keep this up on the screen and have you go through these from your point of view as a passenger when you're inside the submersible. Can you kind of take us through these incidents and what they look like to you from inside the submersible? You had already talked about the thrusters.
Yeah. Well, and I talked about the weights being jammed. Mm-hmm. We couldn't get them off. The acoustic sensors, yeah, and now that I'm looking at it, I do recall, I mean, they were all discussing everything that was happening in a group setting. I didn't necessarily understand the nomenclature they were referring to, but I recall concerns with the acoustic sensor at depth. And the dome hinge retention plate, and I don't recall that. The DVL intermittent, I don't recall. The external lights flickering, yeah, I remember that. The pan and tilt, yeah, we had issues with that. We had issues with the battery. And no, that was the other mission. We had issues with the scrubber, but I think that was 2022. I don't remember the camera being broken, and the rough launch we talked about. Yeah, I recall most of those.
Did any of that cause you any concern while you were inside the submersible at the time?
Well, there wasn't anything I could do about it. I mean, we just had to get back to the surface. And I wasn't unduly, there was a level of concern. I just figured we'd sort it out and return to the surface.
How did the acoustic sensors and the monitoring, was there like a screen inside? that they pulled up? Like, what did that look like?
I believe it was on the laptop screen, but again, I didn't understand what I was looking at, so, you know, to ask me to explain what they were talking about it was all over my head. I knew that they were monitoring the hole, but I believe it was on a laptop or an iPad or something.
Yesterday, we heard witness testimony from another mission specialist. They described the hull to be very quiet on dives. Was that your experience as well?
Generally.
The pop sound that's listed there on the second item, did you hear that sound?
Yeah, we had a couple, you know, pop. The one up top was the loud and alarming one, but yeah, there were a couple noises.
And this, just to differentiate, that was on dive 80, but this was on dive 62. Was there another? It says that 1,700 meters after pop sound.
I don't recall any loud sounds on 62. No, it was the only loud one was on the 2022 mission.
Okay, thank you. You can take that down, Lieutenant Steele. Thank you. Did any employees of OceanGate or past employees ever bring up safety concerns to you?
Safety concerns regards the operation of the Titan.
The operation or the construction of the Titan?
Well, I never personally met David Lockridge, who was the main critic, but I was aware of him, and I was aware of some of his concerns. I don't recall specifically talking to OceanGate employees that had concerns that were expressed to me in any really coherent fashion. I mean, there were always general discussions, you know, about the safety of the ship and making it a safer environment. But I think what you're asking is, did somebody tell me that it wasn't structurally intact and I shouldn't get in it, and that never happened.
How were you made aware of the concerns from Mr. Lockridge?
I believe David Kincannon filled me in on that reality. He knew David, and he knew of the past issues.
Can you kind of go through that conversation with Mr. Kincannon about that?
I don't recall the exact context of the conversation. It was just a conversation about the evolution of the Titan, and I don't even remember when that conversation was. But yeah, I do remember talking about his concerns, and also one of the elements of that discussion was that most of the concerns that were articulated by that group of people that wrote the letter, that was a previous iteration of the Titan. And some of those concerns had been addressed in the construction of the Titan that I was on. So, you have to clarify, as I'm sure you're well aware, that a lot of the complaints that David Lockridge had and that the panel had when they wrote were about the previous iteration of, previous submersible. And some of those issues were tested and corrected in the construction of the Titan.
Was there ever a time you were on a dive in the Titan that you ever felt unsafe?
I mean, it goes back to the original mandate. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be a thrilling adventure. So in a broad sense, I didn't feel completely safe at any time, but I never felt personally that I was, well, we got stuck momentarily in the Titanic, but with Stockton, but he was absolutely unflappable, and I was sitting at his right shoulder, and I'd asked him to go around where the brake was, and we had, for a few moments, we had gotten stuck, and I said, and he was very quiet, and he was working the controls, and did I say Stockton? I meant PH. And I leaned over and I said, PH, it seems that we're stuck. And he says, yes, Fred, we are. And then he got it out, and we went on and I tried to reach the stern element. So yeah, and that moment, I don't think, in fact, everyone else on the sub at that point wanted to go back to the surface, but I prevailed upon PH to making a shot for the stern, which we attempted to do until Wendy got concerned about what we were up to and told us to come up immediately. So I answered your question.
And can we just, for clarification, which dive was that on?
That was the 2022 dive.
Dive 80?
I'm sorry?
Dive 80 in
Yes,
2022? And who was on that dive again with you? I know you just said PH was on that dive with you, but
Well, PH was on both my dives, and Scott Griffith was the pilot during the free fall, and during the ascent, PH took over flying in the nose when we were actually at the wreck site. And we were accompanied by two other mission specialists, the father and son, Colin and Richard Talon, out of St. John's.
can you kind of tell us about your relationship with Mr. Rush? What was that like?
I really liked Stockton and had a lot of respect for him. Like I said, he was a brilliant visionary. He was an inventor. He had this idea of exploring the deep and colonizing it and leading humanity into the last great frontier. And I admired him. We did occasionally have differences on certain things that I discussed with him. And for someone who was a risk taker, I got the impression he thought I was a bit of a troublemaker, not in a negative way, just kind of a carefree, tongue-in-cheek individual who enjoyed the process maybe more than I should. But so the one year at the end of they gave a bunch of awards out, and of course I was awarded the troublemaker award. So we got along fairly well, but I also was well aware that there were times that I tested Stockton's patience.
With those moments that you tested his patience, were those while you were in a submersible, or can you kind of go into that?
No, it was just it was just breaking rules, the standard rules on the ship.
That you were breaking rules?
Yeah, we'll just yes,
And when you say the ship, are you talking the support vessel or the Titan?
the support vessel.
Mr. Neubauer, that's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Sir, we've been going over an hour. Would you like to take a quick break at this time?
If anyone up there needs a break, feel free. Otherwise, you're at your disposal.
Okay. Well, I'll just do my line and then we'll take a break, sir. I just have some follow-ups from the initial 2 rounds of questioning. First, going back to the incident involving the dome, sir, did you observe the incident as the dome fell off?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall which side of the dome was on the deck of the vessel?
The outside.
And did the dome slide down the ramp?
A short distance, and I got stuck. I actually have a picture of it on my phone.
Yes, sir. I'd like to get that after the proceedings, to the board, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And the picture you have, is it of the dome stuck on the ramp?
Yes, I was on deck. I was on board when it blew off, but then afterwards I got out in the the little Zodiac, and I took a picture from the Zodiac, and it's looking right up the ramp, and you see the dome laying on the ramp.
And sir, just to clarify, it was I think you said face down. Is that it was it wasn't on the ring side, but on the front of the dome?
It was the exterior of the dome. Yeah, it fell forward, and it bounced and got stuck. I mean, it weighed 3,500 pounds. It wasn't easy to move, so
Yes, sir.
it didn't flop around.
How did they recover that? Do you remember?
I believe they had a crane on board, so they basically rigged it and lifted it up and reset it. And then that's why the next dive was supposed to be basically a test to make sure that everything worked, and I insisted on going.
And along that line, sir, who made the call that you shouldn't go on the dive?
Well, they allowed me on the dive. I'm not sure I follow your question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll rephrase. Who made the initial call that you shouldn't, as a mission specialist, be part of that dive?
Well, Stockton, I think, made a very logical decision that they should do it with their inner team. And, and PH wasn't going to be left out of that, and Scott was the co-pilot. So that was the team that was going to descend. And I prevailed upon him to let me participate.
In your opinion, was Mr. Rush the final authority for safety issues?
In my opinion, yes.
Did you ever have a discussion about the U.S. Coast Guard with Mr. Rush?
The U.S. Coast Guard.
Did the U.S. Coast Guard ever come up in any discussions with Mr. Rush?
Probably, but I don't recall. I mean, the Canadian Coast Guard stormed aboard the ship in 2021, armed with AR-14s, body armor, and sidearms, and I still don't understand what they were after. Maybe to check and see if we were wearing our mask or something, but I have no idea what they were doing or why they were heavily armed with body armor. But four of them came ashore when we returned from the mission where we lost our thruster. I mean, came on board, but that was the Canadians. I'm sure he talked about the U.S. Coast Guard, and I'm sure it'd be very entertaining if I remember what he said, but I don't remember.
And sort of clarify the record, for the record, are you familiar with the Canadian maritime structure? Are you sure that was the Canadian Coast Guard?
No, I'm not familiar with their structure, but I would assume that if they had body armor and AR-15s, they were a fairly significant element.
So just for the record, the Canadian Coast Guard is a civilian force that is just search and rescue, and so that it's probably another Canadian authority.
It very well may be. Whoever came on, and I thought it was the Coast Guard. They were heavily armed, which was startling. I don't think that has any bearing on this hearing. I just mentioned it in passing. I thought it was the Coast Guard.
Sir, going back to dive 80, you mentioned that the Titan was entangled for a short period of time. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you remember what the Titan was entangled with?
Yes, for my own reasons, I wanted to investigate. The ship broke in half, and normally everybody wants to see the iconic bow shot or the recognizable components, which I wanted to see as well. And we kind of descended a little bit into the grand staircase because the skylight was gone, and so we saw all the normal iconic sites, and I wanted to investigate the area of the rupture, and I asked PH to get back. And of course, there's a lot of current swirling around, and when we briefly got stuck, it was just like pipes and things, and PH very quickly. When I say stuck, we weren't stuck. I doubt if it was more than a minute or two, and we were definitely stuck. Yeah.
And just to clarify, the Titan was entangled with the wreckage of the Titanic. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Do you remember what part of the Titan was entangled?
I think we just snagged one of the skids on some pipe or something. I don't think it was that big of a deal, but yeah, we were. I mean, obviously, when you're down there, it feels like a big deal. PH certainly wasn't overly concerned, and he very quickly piloted the Titan away from and released it.
Thank you, sir. Those are the extent of my questions. Before we transition to the National Transportation Safety Board, I'd like to take a recess.
Sure.
And we'll reconvene at 9:50. This hearing is now back in session. Mr. Hagan, I just had one follow-up question before we go to the NTSB. In regard to the incident with the Titanic, was that reported to topside, to the Horizon Arctic?
You mean when we got stuck?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I may be overblowing the whole experience. I mean, we had a skid stuck for a minute, maybe. It wasn't a big deal, and I'm sure it was discussed. I don't remember.
Was there a discussion after the mission was over, topside?
I don't remember.
At this time, I'd like to go to Mr. Muse.
Good morning again, sir. I just have a few follow-ups. Do you hold a merchant mariner's credential from the United States or any other country?
I do not. You said mariner credentials?
Yes, sir.
No, I don't.
When you entered Canada, did you enter as a tourist or as a seafarer?
In 2021, I entered as a mission specialist.
Were you instructed to tell customs or immigration on your role in what you're doing there, either as a tourist or some other function?
Yeah, I was told to tell them that I was participating in the mission and that I was a member of the team that was going to go down on the submersible, which was correct. I mean, I was also a paying mission specialist, or as you say, a tourist. I did not use the word tourist to the Canadians because I did not think it would be conducive to them allowing me to enter the country, especially with their onerous and anal interpretation of COVID protocols.
During the visit, or as you said, when they stormed aboard in 2021, was that? Do you know? Was that when you came back from a mission, or were you sitting there doing training, about to go on a mission?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the first part?
When the Canadian authorities came on board,
Oh, yes.
was that? Were you sitting there waiting to go on a mission, or was that when you came?
No,
back
no.
from a mission?
That was when we returned and we towed the Titan back on the platform. We pulled into dock, and immediately 4 heavily armed individuals, came on board, much to my consternation. And I initially thought they'd finally caught up to me, but it turned out it was all just some perfunctory bureaucratic snafu. I to this day, have no idea what they were doing.
Okay. Thank you for your time today, sir. I have no further questions.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to go to OceanGate for any questions, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hagan. Just one question. You mentioned the brief entanglement with the Titanic debris during dive 80. Was that intentional on the part of OceanGate?
No, it certainly wasn't intentional. It was completely my fault, and nobody's fault but mine. I was egging PH on, but it was not intentional, and it really was not a big deal. I don't want to overstate that at all.
That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Fawcett, I understand you have a follow-up question?
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here today. My name is Keith Fawcett. So I just want to go back to Dive 80. Who made the final determination on the cause of the loud noise that was observed when the Titan reached the surface?
Scott Griffith and Stockton were the two that were actually taking responsibility to investigate that, and they jointly made that determination.
Talking about the pre-dive checks, if you'll sit there for a minute and just think of yourself back in the Titan hull when you made those dives, was the process for the pre-dive checks an orderly process, as if they were following a checklist or a procedure?
Yeah, it would be similar to the checklist you'd use on an airplane. You just go through and mark off things, and they were also talking, by radio, I believe, on the surface to people outside who were also responding, like they were checking off items on a checklist. I don't recall exactly what those items were. But yes, it did seem like an orderly process, and there was attention paid to any anomalies or incidents. And like I said, that's why out of 100 attempts, they only made 13 actual descents to the Titanic, because of the attempt to follow a protocol. And as soon as you got past their threshold of tolerance, they aborted.
During the missions that you were on, do you recall the pilot or OceanGate personnel inside the Titan saying that all of the real-time acoustic sensors were properly functioning as part of the pre-dive check?
I don't remember.
And then you mentioned getting stuck on the Titanic wreckage.
Well, I'm sorry I mentioned it, but yeah.
Do you, prior to your dives, did OceanGate tell you, pardon me, that they had notified the Canadian or the United States Coast Guard of the mission or the expedition so that they would be in a position to assist you if something like entanglement on wreckage or some other problem occurred on the ocean bottom?
No, but I did have clear conversations with at least PH and probably others. The conversation as related to me was that there are few assets on Earth capable of getting to depth, and that if something went wrong, that we were all going to die, and PH related that repeatedly. That was a common conversational thread, I think, on board, was that there were limited assets. They probably could not be organized logistically and scrambled in time to save anyone if something went wrong. And that was the paradigm that we had to be comfortable with.
Did OceanGate ever tell you that they had notified potential contractors or other submersible operators of the expedition so that they would be ready in the event there was a problem in the vessel, the Titan was on the ocean bottom?
I don't recall that.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have, sir.
Mr. Hagan, I have a question about your perception of Mr. Nargelet's role at OceanGate, or during the role during the excursions. Did you understand him to be an employee of OceanGate?
No, he was an employee of RMS Titanic, Inc.
And can you explain the process for the piloting on board for Dive 80? Like, was it either Mr. Griffiths or Mr. Nargelet?
Scott basically was in command during the free fall, which there's not a whole lot to do other than free fall. When we got near the bottom, they moved the controller into the nose, and Scott was flying by referencing an onboard camera, an external camera. PH took over and did the visual flying by the wreck site. And I believe everyone was aware that PH was not an employee of OceanGate. He was there as an expert. He was, his nickname was Mr. Titanic, and he was just this warm, vital, extremely likable guy that you couldn't help but feel comfortable with, regardless of who you were. And he was a wonderful addition to the team. But when I say he wasn't an employee, I think everyone also viewed him as an integral part of the OceanGate team.
And was part of that to provide kind of a narration as a guide?
Oh yeah, he would definitely. PH was definitely a draw, and he was such a wonderful human being that he just added a special element to any mission that you were on with him, and even on board ship, he just he made it a pleasure to endure even the most mundane experiences.
Understand. At this time, are there any final questions for Mr. Hagan? Mr. Hagan, do you have anything that would be valuable to the board that we have not asked you?
Well, if I'm done, I'll just, express my thoughts very briefly. I don't know if it's any value to anyone, but, one of the concerns that I have is that the world at large viewed this from the outset as this disaster where somebody had to be blamed, and without access to the facts. So first off, I want to profoundly thank this board for your attempts to deliberate what happened in a calm manner and come to the facts in hopes of preventing a recurrence. At the same time, I think my worry is that the greater tragedy than the OceanGate tragedy is if we use this event to inhibit future innovation, and if the regulations derived from this may prevent that kind of innovative approach to the undersea world. The depths of the ocean are fundamental to life, and the elements that are going to sustain us in the coming green economy need to be harvested in a sustainable fashion. So we need ways and means to access that. And the government has not currently been investing the resources to do that. So I think it's up to private enterprise to help, and hopefully with the help of the government, just as the government is working with Elon Musk. And Musk is hoping to colonize space, and I'd love to go there with him. But I did go with Stockton. He was hoping to explore and colonize inner space, which is the last great frontier. So hopefully it's a teachable moment. If you know history, in 1934 we had the airmail fiasco, and it was a disaster. The Army Air Corps tried to fly the airmail with planes, open cockpit planes that only had magnetic compasses, and it was a catastrophe. But it was a teachable moment. And from that moment, the United States had a competition for manufacturers to make designs for the next generation of airplanes, and one of them was the B-17 bomber. So the only reason that we were even somewhat prepared for World War II evolved from that teachable moment. And I'd like to think that this is a teachable moment, and my hope is that, if nothing else, the government and private enterprise team together as they have with Elon Musk in space, because inner space and the depths of the ocean are much more important in the short term than outer space. So it's critical, and I thank you all for your time. I will express I was unhappy with the Coast Guard during the disaster, and again, as it turned out, there was nothing that could have been done. But in the moment, those of us who knew and loved the people on board, we wanted every effort made to save them. And I believe there was a reaction to this, that there had been an acoustic event, and that they had been lost. And it seemed to me, from my perspective, that we should have scrambled the few assets that could have been scrambled in order to effect a rescue rather than a recovery. And I believe there was an asset in Buffalo that was not sent out. So even if there was evidence suggesting an implosion, my feeling was that we should have pursued every possible avenue until we knew definitively that my friends were dead. And if for no other reason, I believe it would have been an opportunity to test those systems and to put them on site. And I don't believe that happened. That's my only criticism. And again, I'm not blaming anyone. I just wish that it happened. But I do thank you for your inquiry, and you've been very calm and deliberative, and I appreciate your tone, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Just for the information, for the record, we do have Coast Guard witnesses coming to testify about the search and rescue efforts next week. Excuse me. Mr. Hagan, thank you for your testimony. You are now released from these proceedings. If we need further information from you, I will contact you directly. If you need further information about this hearing, you may contact our recorder, Lieutenant Kelly Steele. At this time, the hearing will recess and reconvene at 10:20.
Thank you very much.